The transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of Zarian Prime, and Kyung-ho felt his stomach drop like a stone falling into deep water. His hands pressed against the small round window as he watched the strange alien world grow bigger and bigger below them. The planet looked angry, with its red rocks and purple clouds swirling around like an angry storm that never ended behind him. The other colonists whispered and pointed at him like he was some kind of crazy person. They called him names and laughed at his research books about dragons. Most of them were miners and soldiers who came here to dig up valuable crystals and fight off the dangerous creatures that lived on this world. They thought Kyung-ho was stupid for wanting to study the giant flying beasts instead of killing them. Dongmin sat in the seat next to him, eating protein bars and shaking his head. Dongmin was a big, strong man who could carry heavy mining equipment like it was made of paper. His arms were covered in scars from working with dangerous machines, and his voice was loud enough to be heard over the ship's engines. "You are completely crazy, Kyung-ho," he said while chewing his food. "Those monsters killed 30 people last month. They burned down the entire western mining camp with their fire breath, and you want to go study them like they are cute little pets." Kyung-ho did not look away from the window. He kept watching the planet's surface. As it got closer and closer, he could see the black marks where the dragons had attacked human settlements. The burned ground looked like giant scars across the red landscape, but he also saw something else that the others missed. The attack patterns were not random. The dragons always hit the same types of places, and they never attacked areas near water sources or certain types of rock formations. "I do not think they are just monsters," he said quietly. His voice was soft but determined, like someone who had made up their mind about something important. "I have been studying the attack reports for months. The dragons are smart. They choose their targets carefully. They are trying to tell us something." The other colonists heard him and started laughing louder. A woman named Haijin, who worked as a security officer, turned around in her seat and stared at him with angry eyes. "Tell us something," she said with a mean smile on her face. "Like what, Kyung-ho? That they want us to leave their planet, that they do not like humans digging holes in their backyard." "Well, we already know that, and we do not care. This is our world now. We claimed it fair and square." But Kyung-ho shook his head slowly. He pulled out his research tablet and showed her pictures of dragon fossils from old Earth. Back on their home planet millions of years ago, there had been creatures that looked just like the dragons of Zarian Prime. The old legend said that dragons were wise and could talk to humans if people were brave enough and smart enough to try. "These creatures are not like the wild animals we know," he explained, pointing at the pictures on his screen. "Look at their brain size. Look at how they build their nests. Look at how they work together. When they attack our settlements, they have language. They have culture. They might be more intelligent than we are." The ship suddenly jerked and everyone grabbed onto their seats. The pilot announced over the speaker system that they were beginning final approach to landing Zone 7. All passengers needed to strap in tight because the landing was going to be rough. The dragons did not like it when human ships came down from space, and they often tried to attack. During landing, Kyung-ho felt his heart beating fast, but not because he was scared of crashing. He was excited because he was finally going to see real dragons up close. All his life he had dreamed of meeting creatures like the ones in the old stories. His grandmother used to tell him tales about brave knights who became friends with dragons and rode them through the sky to fight evil monsters. When the ship finally touched down on the rocky ground, everyone cheered and clapped. But Kyung-ho was already thinking about his mission while the other colonists would unpack mining equipment and set up defensive walls. He had different plans. He was going to find dragon eggs. His research had shown him something important that no one else seemed to understand. Adult dragons were dangerous because they were protecting their babies. All the attacks happened near places where humans had found dragon nesting sites. If someone could show the dragons that humans were not a threat to their children, maybe the fighting would stop. The cargo bay doors opened with a loud hiss and hot alien air rushed into the ship. It smelled like sulfur and burning metal, but also something else, something wild and free, like mountain air back on Earth. Kyung-ho gathered his equipment, which was much different from what the other colonists carried. Instead of weapons and mining tools, he had thermal blankets and heat lamps. He had nutrient analyzers to figure out what baby dragons needed to eat. He had collected rare metals and crystals that his research suggested might be important for dragon health. Most importantly, he had patience and hope that the others did not have as the colonists walked down the ramp onto the planet's surface. Kyung-ho could see the settlement in the distance. It looked like a small metal city surrounded by high walls, and guard tower smoke rose from several buildings, and he could see scorch marks on the walls where dragons had attacked. The whole place looked like it was ready for war, but Kyung-ho was not interested in the settlement. He was looking at the mountains and caves in the distance. That was where the dragons lived. That was where he needed to go. His fellow colonists thought he was walking toward his death, but he believed he was walking toward the most important discovery in human history, the first day on Zarian Prime was busy and dangerous. Several dragons flew overhead during the afternoon. Their wings were so big, they blocked out the sun. When they passed, the sound they made was like thunder mixed with music. It was beautiful and terrifying. At the same time, the colonists ran for cover and fired warning shots with their laser weapons, but the dragons did not attack. They just watched and flew away. That night, Kyung-ho could not sleep. He lay in his small room in the temporary housing, listening to the strange sounds of the alien world. Through his window, he could see lights in the mountains where the dragons lived. The lights were not fire. They were something else, something that pulsed and moved like a heartbeat. He knew that tomorrow he would begin the most dangerous part of his mission. He would leave the safety of the human settlement and go into dragon territory alone. Everyone thought he was crazy, and maybe they were right, but Kyung-ho believed that sometimes crazy ideas were the only ones that could change the world. In his dreams that night, he saw himself flying through purple clouds on the back of a great dragon. The wind rushed through his hair, and the world spread out below him like a beautiful painting. When he woke up the next morning, he could still feel the dream like it was a memory of something that had really happened. Today would be the day. He started building his nest for baby dragons. Today his real adventure would begin. 3 weeks had passed since Kyung-ho found the dragon eggs hidden deep in the crystal cave, and those 3 weeks felt like the longest time of his entire life. He had barely slept more than 2 hours each night because he needed to check the temperature and adjust his makeshift nest every few hours. The eggs were huge, like small cars, and their shells looked like they were made of the same crystal material that covered adult dragon scales. The cave where he found them was beautiful, but scary at the same time. Crystal formations grew from the walls and ceiling like frozen lightning, and they glowed with a soft blue light that never went away. The air inside was warm and humid like a greenhouse back on Earth, but it smelled different. It smelled ancient and wild, like something that had been there since the beginning of time. Kyung-ho had moved all his equipment into the cave, even though it meant he had to walk 2 hours each way to get supplies from the human settlement. The other colonists thought he had completely lost his mind, and most of them refused to come near the cave. They said it was too dangerous and that he would get himself killed by angry parent dragons, but Kyung-ho noticed something important that the others missed. When adult dragons flew over the area during their daily patrols, they never came close to his cave. It was like they could sense that their babies were safe inside. They would circle high above, making soft calling sounds, but they never attacked or even landed nearby. On the morning of the 21st day, Kyung-ho was checking the temperature sensors when he heard a sound that made his heart jump. The first egg was cracking. A thin line appeared across the crystal shell, and then another and another. The sound was like glass breaking, but much more musical, like tiny bells ringing. He sat down next to the egg and waited. His hands were shaking with excitement and fear because he had no idea what would happen when the baby dragon came out. Would it try to bite him? Would it be afraid of him? Would it even survive outside its shell? The crack grew bigger and bigger until finally a small piece of shell fell away. A tiny golden eye looked out at him and blinked slowly. Then a small nose poked through the hole. The nose was covered in scales that sparkled like jewels, and it sniffed the air carefully like it was trying to understand this new world. When the baby dragon finally broke free from its shell, Kyung-ho could not believe how small it was. The creature was no bigger than a house cat, even though he knew it would someday grow to be as large as a building. Its scales were soft and flexible, not hard like adult dragon armor, and its wings were tiny and delicate, like butterfly wings. The baby dragon looked at him with intelligent golden eyes that seemed to see right into his soul. It made a soft chirping sound like a bird, but deeper and more musical. Kyung-ho had prepared for this moment by studying every Dragon communication recording he could find. He made a gentle humming sound back, and the baby dragon tilted its head to listen very slowly and carefully. Kyung-ho reached out his hand. The baby dragon sniffed his fingers and then did something amazing. It rubbed its small head against his palm like a cat asking to be petted. Its scales felt warm and smooth like polished stone, and when Kyung-ho gently scratched behind its tiny ears, the dragon made a happy purring sound. "I will call you Hanyul," he whispered to the little creature. "Hanyul means sky, and someday you will fly through the clouds like your parents." The baby dragon seemed to understand that it had been given a name because it looked up at Kyung-ho and made a different sound, almost like it was trying to repeat the word when Kyung-ho offered the baby dragon some of the special food he had prepared. Hanyul accepted it without fear. The food was a mixture of processed minerals and synthesized proteins that his research suggested would be good for growing dragons. The baby ate eagerly and then curled up in the warm blankets Kyung-ho had placed around the nest too. Days later, the second egg hatched. This baby dragon was slightly larger than Hanyul and had scales that shimmered with green and blue colors like the surface of deep water. Kyung-ho named this one Baram, which means wind, because when it moved its tiny wings, they made a sound like air rushing through leaves. The third egg took 4 more days to hatch, but when it finally opened, it revealed the most beautiful baby dragon of all. This one had scales that changed color depending on how the light hit them, sometimes silver, sometimes gold, sometimes rainbow-colored like oil on water. Kyung-ho called this one Nuri, which means world, because its colors reminded him of all the different planets he had seen. Having 3 baby dragons to care for was hard work, but also the most amazing experience of Kyung-ho's life. Each dragon had its own personality. Hanyul was curious and brave, always wanting to explore new parts of the cave. Baram was gentle and calm, preferring to sleep curled up next to the heat lamps. Nuri was playful and mischievous, often trying to steal Kyung-ho's tools or hide his food supplies. The dragons grew quickly. Within 2 weeks, they were the size of large dogs, and their scales were becoming harder and more crystalline like their parents. They learned to understand simple words and commands, and they seemed to enjoy listening to Kyung-ho talk even when he was just thinking out loud about his research. But the most amazing thing was how much they seemed to care about him. When Kyung-ho had to leave the cave to get supplies, all 3 dragons would become upset. They would make sad, crying sounds and try to follow him to the cave entrance. When he returned, they would rush to greet him like he had been gone for years. Instead of just a few hours, the other colonists did not understand what was happening. Some of them came to watch from a safe distance, and they could not believe their eyes when they saw Kyung-ho playing with creatures that looked like miniature versions of the monsters that had been attacking their settlements. Binwoo, the settlement leader, visited the cave several times, and each time he became more angry and worried. "You are putting everyone in danger," he would shout at Kyung-ho. "What happens when those things grow up and remember that humans killed their parents? What happens when they decide we are their enemies?" But Kyung-ho tried to explain that the dragons were not enemies. They were intelligent beings who could learn and feel emotions just like humans. The babies had already learned to trust him, and he believed that trust could be the key to ending the war between humans and dragons. Late at night, when the 3 baby dragons were sleeping peacefully around him, Kyung-ho would look up at the glowing crystals on the cave ceiling and wonder what the future would bring. He knew that his little family was growing stronger every day, and soon they would be too big to hide in the cave. The real test was coming, and he hoped he was ready for it. 2 months had passed since the baby dragons first hatched, and they were no longer tiny creatures that could fit in Kyung-ho's arms now. Hanyul, Baram, and Nuri were each the size of large horses, and their scales had developed the same crystal formations that made adult dragons nearly impossible to hurt with human weapons. But unlike the wild dragons that attacked the settlement, these 3 were gentle and playful with their human caretaker. Every morning, Kyung-ho would wake up surrounded by 3 warm dragon bodies that had curled around him during the night to share their body heat. The cave had become too small for all of them, so they had moved to a larger cavern system deeper in the mountains. The new home had natural hot springs that kept the dragons comfortable and plenty of space for them to practice flying. The most amazing discovery came when Kyung-ho realized that the dragons could understand human speech, not just simple commands like sit or stay, but complex ideas and Conversations, he could explain to them why he needed to go back to the human settlement, and they would wait patiently for his return. He could tell them about his research, and they would listen with obvious interest, tilting their heads and making soft questioning. Soundshino had become the leader of the three dragons. She was brave and protective, always positioning herself between Kyung-ho and any potential danger. When strange sounds echoed through the caves at night, she would lift her head and listen carefully before deciding whether they needed to investigate. Baram was the gentlest of the three dragons. He seemed to understand when Kyung-ho was sad or worried and would nuzzle him with his great head or wrap a wing around him. Like a warm blanket, Baram also had the best hearing and could detect the approach of other dragons or humans long before they became visiblenary. Was the most intelligent and curious dragon. She had learned to use her claws to manipulate objects, and could even help Kyung-ho with simple tasks like sorting his research materials or organizing his equipment. She seemed fascinated by human technology and would watch for hours as Kyung-ho worked on his computers and sensors. But life was becoming more dangerous for everyone on Zarian Prime. The human mining operations had expanded deeper into the planet, and this had made the adult dragons increasingly angry and aggressive. More settlements were being attacked, and the colonial government was talking about bringing in military forces with more powerful weapons. Sujin, the colony's xenobiologist, had started visiting Kyung-ho secretly. She was fascinated by what he had accomplished and wanted to document the relationship between human and dragon. At first, she was terrified when she saw the three large dragons, but she quickly realized they were nothing like the monsters that everyone feared. They respond to your emotions, she told Kyung-ho during one of her visits. When you are calm and happy, they are calm and happy. When you are excited about something, they get excited too. It's like they can read your mind. Kyung-ho had noticed this too. The dragons seemed to be connected to him in ways he did not fully understand. When he was working on a difficult problem, they would gather around him and watch quietly as if they wanted to help. When he made a breakthrough discovery, they would make happy, trilling sounds and dance around the cave. The connection worked both ways. Kyung-ho found that he could sense the dragon's emotions. When they were hungry, he would feel hungry too. When they were tired, he would become sleepy. When they were worried about something, he would feel anxious until he figured out what was bothering them. This emotional bond became very important when the situation at the human settlement grew worse. Food supplies were running low because dragon attacks had disrupted the supply ships. The colonists were scared and angry, and many of them wanted to use banned weapons that would kill all the dragons on the planet. Commander Taewon arrived with a military unit that had orders to solve the dragon problem permanently. He brought plasma cannons and chemical weapons that could poison the air that dragons breathed. The plan was to attack the main dragon nesting areas and eliminate the entire species. When Kyung-ho heard about this plan, he felt sick to his stomach. The dragons were not monsters. They were intelligent beings who were just trying to protect their world from what they saw as invaders. But how could he make the humans understand this? How could he prevent a genocide? That night, he sat with his three dragons and tried to explain what was happening. The dragons listened carefully and seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. Hanyul made low rumbling sounds that meant she was thinking hard about something. Baram spread his wings in a protective gesture, and Nuri paced back and forth like she was planning something. Kyung-ho realized that his dragons were still too young and small to defend themselves against human weapons, but they were also too big to hide anymore. Soon the military would discover their cave, and then everything would be over unless he could find a way to prove that dragons and humans could live together peacefully. The next morning brought terrible news. The adult dragons had launched their biggest attack yet on the main human settlement. They had destroyed several buildings and injured many people. The colonists were demanding immediate action, and Commander Taewon was preparing to begin his extermination campaign. As Kyung-ho watched smoke rising from the settlement in the distance, he knew that time was running out. His three dragons stood beside him, looking out over the valley where their wild relatives were fighting desperately to protect their world. They made sad, singing sounds that seemed to carry across the mountains. Kyung-ho made a decision. That would change everything. He would have to take his dragons to the settlement and show everyone that these creatures were not enemies. They were potential allies who could help both species survive on this dangerous planet. But first he needed To prepare his dragons for the most important moment of their lives, they would have to be braver than they had ever been before, and trust him completely even when everything around them seemed scary and dangerous. The future of two species was about to depend on three young dragons and one human who believed that understanding was stronger than fear. The emergency alarm screamed across the settlement like a wounded animal, and Kyung-ho felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. He had been preparing breakfast for his three dragons when the sound reached their mountain cave, but now food was forgotten as explosions echoed across the valley below. Black smoke rose from multiple buildings and the bright flashes of laser weapons lit up the morning sky like deadly lightning. This attack was different from all the others. Kyung-ho could see from his high vantage point that dozens of adult dragons were working together in coordinated groups. Some breathed fire at the defensive walls, while others used their powerful claws to tear apart the metal structures the humans were fighting back with everything they had, but their weapons seemed useless against the crystal armor of the attacking dragon. Shinul, Baram, and Nuri stood beside him at the cave entrance, and all three dragons were making distress sounds that Kyung-ho had never heard before. Their calls were deep and mournful, like they were crying for their wild relatives. The young dragons could sense the pain and anger of the adult dragons, and it was making them extremely upset. Kyung-ho grabbed his communication device and tried to contact the settlement, but all he could hear was static and panicked voices shouting orders. Someone was screaming about casualties, and another voice was calling for immediate evacuation. The situation was falling apart completely. "We have to do something," he said to his dragons, but he had no idea what that something could be. His three dragons were still young compared to the massive adults that were attacking the settlement, and he could not ask them to fly into a battle where they might be killed. Commander Taewon's voice suddenly cut through the radio. "Static attention, all units, we are implementing Protocol 7. Repeat, we are implementing Protocol 7. All civilians evacuate immediately. We are beginning total extermination." Procedurist Kyung-ho felt his heart stop. Protocol 7 was the code name for the banned weapons that would kill every living thing in a wide area, including his own dragons. The military was planning to use chemical gas that would poison the entire valley and turn it into a dead zone where nothing could survive. His three dragons seemed to understand that something terrible was about to happen. They moved closer to him and made protective gestures with their wings like they were trying to shield him from danger, but Kyung-ho knew that hiding would not save any of them. Once the chemical weapons were deployed, everyone in the area would die. As he watched the battle below, he suddenly realized something important that no one else had noticed. The attacking dragons were being careful to avoid certain areas of the settlement. They were not destroying the medical buildings or the water treatment plants, and they were not attacking the residential areas where families lived. The dragons were angry, but they were not trying to kill every human they could find. This was not mindless destruction. This was a surgical strike against specific targets, and Kyung-ho thought he knew why. The human mining operations had been digging deeper and deeper into the planet, and they must have damaged something that was very important to the dragon population. Maybe they destroyed dragon eggs, or maybe they broke into sacred burial grounds, or maybe they damaged something that the dragons needed to survive. Whatever it was, the dragons were fighting desperately to protect something precious to them in that moment of understanding. Kyung-ho made the most dangerous decision of his life. He climbed onto Hanyul's back and felt her powerful muscles tense beneath him. She had grown large enough to carry him easily, and her crystal scales provided handholds that kept him secure. "Are you ready, girl?" he asked, and Hanyul turned her great head to look at him with one golden eye. She made a sound that meant yes, and spread her magnificent wings. The wingspan was now wider than a small aircraft, and the membrane between the wing bones shimmered with rainbow colors. The other colonists at the settlement had never seen anything like what happened next. A human riding a dragon rose into the air above the battlefield and flew directly toward the center of the conflict. Some of the human soldiers stopped shooting because they could not believe what they were seeing. Others tried to aim at the dragon, but held their fire when they realized there was a person on its back. Flying on Hanyul's back was the most incredible experience of Kyung-ho's life. The wind rushed through his hair, and the ground fell away beneath them until the buildings looked like toys. The sensation of flight was freedom and power and terror all mixed together into something that made his heart race with excitement. From the air he could see the full scope of the battle, and what he saw made him understand. Everything the human mining complex had been built directly on top of an ancient dragon burial ground. The massive excavation machines had torn through centuries-old tombs and scattered dragon bones across the landscape like garbage. The adult dragons were not attacking out of mindless rage. They were trying to protect the remains of their ancestors and recover precious artifacts that had been disturbed by human machinery. This was not a war of conquest. This was a desperate attempt to preserve their cultural heritage. Haniel seemed to understand the situation as clearly as her human rider. She began making complex calls to the adult dragons below, sounds that Kyung-ho had never heard before. The calls were deep and musical and carried a message that transcended language barriers. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The attacking dragons stopped their assault and looked up at the strange sight of one of their own kind carrying a human through the sky. Their aggressive roars changed to confused, questioning calls as they tried to understand what was happening. An enormous female dragon with scales like black diamonds landed on the highest building in the settlement. Her presence was so powerful that both humans and dragons fell silent. She was clearly the leader of the dragon forces, and her intelligence was obvious in the way she studied the situation. With calculating eye, Nul flew directly toward this ancient queen and landed gracefully on the same building. Kyung-ho found himself face to face with a creature that could have killed him with a single breath, but instead, she watched him with curious interest. The old dragon made a sound that was almost like human speech, and Haniel responded with her own complex vocalizations. It was clear that they were having a conversation, and that Kyung-ho was the subject of their discussion. Slowly, carefully, the ancient queen lowered her great head until she was at eye level with the small human who had dared to fly into battle on Dragonback. She studied him for a long moment and then did something that shocked everyone who was watching. She gently touched his forehead with the tip of her nose in what was clearly a gesture of respect and recognition. What happened in the hours after Kyung-ho landed on the settlement building would later be called the Zarian Accord, but at the time it felt more like barely controlled chaos. The ancient dragon queen, whose presence commanded respect from both species, had agreed to a temporary ceasefire, but the situation remained as dangerous as a bomb waiting to explode. Commander Tae-won stood at the base of the building with his finger on the trigger of weapons that could kill everyone in the area, including his own soldiers. His face was red with anger and confusion because nothing in his military training had prepared him for negotiating with intelligent aliens who could speak. You have exactly 1 hour to get that monster away from our settlement, he shouted up at Kyung-ho. Then we resume the extermination protocol. We will not be held hostage by these creatures, no matter how smart they think they are. But Binwoo, the settlement leader, was more curious than angry. He had watched Kyung-ho work with the baby dragons for months, and he was beginning to understand that these were not simple animals. They had complex social structures and advanced intelligence that might be equal to or greater than human intelligence. Seo-jin, the xenobiologist, was working frantically to set up her translation equipment. She had recorded hundreds of hours of dragon vocalizations from Kyung-ho's work, and her computers were trying to find patterns that could be used for basic communication. The task was incredibly difficult because dragon language seemed to involve not just sounds but also body movements and even electromagnetic fields. The ancient dragon queen, whom Kyung-ho had decided to call Yunbai, remained perfectly still on the building like a statue made of living crystal, but her eyes were constantly moving as she observed everything around her. She was clearly analyzing the human settlement and trying to understand their technology and behavior. Haniel, Baram, and Nuri had flown up from their mountain cave and now stood protectively around their human friend. The 3 young dragons served as translators between Kyung-ho and Yunbai. When he spoke to them in human language, they would make dragon sounds to Yunbai, and when she responded, they would change their body postures in ways that Kyung-ho was learning to read. The breakthrough came when Soo-jin's computers finally decoded enough dragon language to allow basic communication through the electronic translator. Yunbai was able to explain why the dragons had been attacking human settlements. The translation was rough and full of gaps, but the basic message was clear. The dragons were not native to this planet either. They were refugees from a dying world. who had arrived on Zarian Prime thousands of years ago. They had been slowly terraforming the planet to make it suitable for both dragon and other forms of life. The crystal formations that humans thought were just pretty rocks were actually sophisticated technology that controlled the planet's weather and geological stability. The dragon attacks on human settlements were not random violence. They were desperate attempts to prevent humans from destroying systems that kept the entire planet from falling. Apart when Commander Tae-won heard this explanation through the translator, he laughed with bitter disbelief. So, you are telling me that these monsters are actually trying to save the planet? That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. They are just making excuses for their aggression. But Kyung-ho was beginning to understand something much more important. The dragons were not just protecting their terraforming equipment, they were trying to prevent an ecological disaster that would kill everyone on the planet, both human and dragon. The mining operations had been disrupting systems that were millions of years old through painful, slow communication with Yunbai. He learned that the planet was geologically unstable deep beneath the surface. Massive tectonic forces were building up pressure that could tear the world apart. The Dragon Crystal Network was the only thing holding everything together, and human mining was breaking it piece by piece. We have been trying to repair the damage you have caused, Yunbai explained through the computer translator. But our young are few, and our time grows short. The planet will die if the crystal network fails and we cannot rebuild it alone. This revelation changed everything. The humans were not being attacked by monsters, they were accidentally destroying the life support systems of their new home, and the dragons were trying to save everyone by stopping the destruction. But there was still the question of trust. Both species had been fighting for months, and many individuals on both sides had died in the conflict. How could they work together when there was so much anger and fear between them? The answer came from an unexpected source. Haniel stepped forward and made a series of sounds that the translator interpreted as a request. She wanted to show the humans something that might help them understand what was at stake. Yunbai considered this request for several long minutes while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, she made a decision that would change the relationship between humans and dragons forever. She would allow one human to join a dragon expedition to the planet's core where the most critical repairs needed to be made. The journey would be incredibly dangerous. The core region was filled with temperatures hot enough to melt metal and radiation levels that could kill an unprotected human in minutes. Only someone riding a dragon with full crystal armor protection could survive the trip. But if a human could witness the dragon terraforming work firsthand, they would understand that the dragons were not enemies. They were partners in the shared struggle to keep their adopted world alive. Commander Tae-won immediately volunteered for the mission, but Yunbai rejected him through the translator. She had observed his aggressive behavior and did not trust him to remain calm in the presence of the dragon's most sacred and important work. Instead, she chose Kyung-ho, the young scientist who had raised 3 dragon babies from eggs, had already proven that he could form emotional bonds with dragonkind. He would be their ambassador to the human race, and his testimony would determine whether the two species could learn to live together. As preparations began for the most dangerous journey of his life, Kyung-ho looked around at the faces of his fellow humans. Some looked hopeful, but many still looked skeptical and afraid the success of this mission would determine not just his own fate, but the future of human civilization on Zarium Primahaniel nuzzled his shoulder with her great head and made a sound that meant trust and friendship. She was ready to carry him into the heart of the planet where dragons had worked for thousands of years to keep their world alive. The most important flight of both their lives was about to begin. The final battle was not against armies or monsters, it was against the planet itself deep beneath the surface of Zarian Prime. Ancient geological forces were building toward a catastrophe that would tear the world apart and kill every living thing on it. The ground had been shaking for days, and new cracks were appearing in the mountains as pressure built up in the planet's core. Kyung-ho stood at the edge of a massive crater that led down into the depths of the world. The heat rising from below was so intense that it made the air shimmer like water, and the red glow from deep underground was bright enough to see by even in daylight. This was the entrance to the planetary core. where dragons had worked for thousands of years to keep their adopted world-stable Haniel had grown to her full adult size over the past months, and her crystal scales now covered her body like natural armor that could deflect the most intense heat and radiation. She was magnificent and terrifying and beautiful. All at the same time, her wingspan was wider than a building, and when she moved, the ground trembled under her weight. Around them, dozens of adult dragons were gathering for what might be the most important mission in their species' history. Yumbai, the ancient queen, stood at the center of the group, giving instructions in the complex dragon language that sounded like music mixed with thunder. Each dragon had a specific role to play in the delicate work of planetary repair. The human colonists watched from a safe distance as their former enemies prepared to risk their lives to save everyone on the planet. Some of the humans still could not believe what was happening. They had spent months thinking of dragons as monsters, and now they were watching those same creatures prepare to be. Harasu Jin was recording everything with her scientific equipment, while Commander Taewon stood beside her with the expression of amazed disbelief on his face. Even Binwoo, the settlement leader, had come to witness what everyone knew might be the last time they saw Kyung-ho alive. The descent into the planet's core was like flying into hell itself. The temperature rose higher and higher as they went deeper, and the walls of the tunnel glowed with heat that would have killed any unprotected human instantly. But Haniel's crystal scales absorbed and redirected the thermal energy, keeping both dragon and rider safe from the deadly environment. Other dragons flew alongside them in perfect formation, their movements so coordinated that they looked like they were performing an ancient dance. Each dragon carried specialized equipment, made from crystalline materials that could withstand the extreme conditions at the planet's center. As they flew deeper, Kyung-ho began to understand the true scope of what the dragons had accomplished over thousands of years. The tunnel walls were lined with crystal formations that were not natural rock, but sophisticated technology that monitored and controlled the planet's geological activity. Every crystal was precisely placed and perfectly tuned to work with all the others in a vast network that spanned the entire world. The dragons were not just intelligent creatures, they were master engineers who had turned an unstable, dying planet into a stable world capable of supporting life. Their terraforming project was the most ambitious engineering feat that Kyung-ho had ever imagined, and humans had been accidentally destroying it with their mining operations. When they finally reached the core chamber, Kyung-ho saw something that took his breath away. The center of the planet was a vast, spherical cavity filled with floating crystal structures that pulsed with energy like a mechanical heart. The crystals were arranged in complex three-dimensional patterns that created gravitational and magnetic fields strong enough to hold the planet's tectonic plates in stable alignment, but many of the crystals were dark and broken. The human mining operations on the surface had disrupted the delicate network, and without immediate repairs, the entire system would collapse within days. When that happened, massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions would destroy everything on the planet's surface. The repair work was incredibly complex and dangerous. Dragons had to fly through intense energy fields while carrying heavy crystal components to precise locations. Any mistake could trigger a chain reaction that would destroy the core chamber, and everyone in Kyung-ho watched in amazement as the dragons worked together with perfect coordination. They moved through three-dimensional space like they were swimming through water, placing each crystal component with surgical precision. The work required not just physical strength, but incredible intelligence and years of training. His role in the mission was equally important. His human understanding of geological science, combined with his unique bond with the dragons, allowed him to suggest modifications to their repair techniques. By analyzing the stress patterns in the crystal network, he could identify weak points that needed special attention. Working together, human knowledge and dragon power accomplished something that neither species could have achieved alone. The damaged crystals were replaced, the broken connections were repaired, and the planetary stabilization system was restored to full function when they finally emerged from the core chamber. After 18 hours of continuous work, both the human colony and the dragon population had gathered to watch. The planet's trembling had stopped. The dangerous electrical storms that had been building in the atmosphere had dissipated. The sky had cleared to reveal the beautiful double sunset that made Zarian Prime one of the most spectacular worlds in the galaxy. The colonists who had once mocked Kyung-ho for building a nest for baby dragons now watched in silent awe as he dismounted from Haniel's back. The young scientist, who had seen potential where others saw only danger, had not just saved both species. He had created the foundation for a new kind of civilization where humans and dragons could work together as partners. In the months that followed, other human colonies throughout the galaxy heard the story in Prime. They learned about the fool who built a nest for baby dragons and ended up bridging two worlds. Some laughed at first, just as Kyung-ho's original colleagues had laughed, but those who were wise enough to listen learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquest but from the courage to care for something that the rest of the world fears. The universe is vast and full of different kinds of intelligence, and there is room for all of them to thrive. Kyung-ho still cares for his dragons, though Haniel, Baram, and Nuri now have babies of their own. The young dragons of both species grow up playing together, learning that friendship is stronger than fear and that working together makes everyone stronger sometimes. When the twin suns set in perfect harmony over the crystal formations that keep their world stable, Kyung-ho takes to the skies again, riding Haniel through clouds that shimmer with rainbow colors. He remembers the day when building a simple nest changed the fate of two species forever, and he smiles knowing that the best adventures always begin with someone brave enough to try something that everyone else thinks is impossible.